Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Mark Johnston and Heather Choate.
I'm Heather Choate, and I'm here with international marriage expert Mark Johnston. How are you doing, Mark?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing great. Doing really well.
Awesome. Ben and I just got back from Cancun last week, so we took a little break on our podcast, but I'm feeling refreshed and recharged. We were celebrating 14 years of marriage, and just a couple days on the beach, people asked me what was your favorite part, and I said, doing nothing. Doing nothing, just having nothing to do.
You guys were able to get away from the kids there as well, weren't you?
What's that?
You were able to do that away from the kids, weren't you?
Yeah, so it was just him and I for our anniversary.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was fabulous. And that's hard to do. We have 7 kids. And so, it's really important that we get that time. So anyway, I'm feeling refreshed and recharged and high on romantic vibes. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about part 2 of our end affair cure. And we're going to be talking about secrets to making your marriage even better. The best marriage possible, even if you've had an affair. We're not saying you have to have an affair to have a better marriage, just to make that really clear. But we just want to talk about how it is possible that you could have an even better marriage, even if you're facing something as, traumatic as an affair. And maybe it's not an affair for you, maybe it's something else, but the principles are still going to apply.
Very similar.
Exactly. So we're going to help your spouse. We're going to help show you how to help your spouse be honest and be faithful and committed to you. And then some practices to heal and release the pain, even if you've hurt each other, so that you can truly move forward and have the best marriage possible. Before we get to that, though, I'm going to share our client win of the week. This one comes from Brian. I'm just going to share the highlights. Okay, just the last little bit. He said,
longer post, yeah.
Yeah. He says, I just came to the realization that I needed to do something different. And I kept working on myself and honestly started doing my own thing and just gave it space for a bit, which is a really scary thought. And it seemed to be working. All right, now check out this list of wins. Win. A couple weeks ago, she mentioned to me she wanted to continue to work on the marriage. And this is after a roller coaster of them not wanting to work things out, right? No chance, he said earlier, to have it work out. So a couple weeks ago, she mentioned she wanted to continue to work on the marriage. When she put her wedding ring back on after not wearing it for over a year. When we are back to sleeping in the same bed again after 8 months. When she said, I love you for the first time in as long as I can remember. He says in the end, I guess moral of the story is trust the process. Even when your heart and your head tells you to push, which he knows our push versus pull method, just step back and work on the most important thing, which is you. And you will see that you can pull them back to you. I think we've talked about this a little bit last time, Mark, the push versus pull. How crucial is that? Like he said, he kind of backed off and worked on himself, which was a really scary thing. But how important is that in the push versus pull method that we teach, just so everyone knows exactly what he's talking about?
Well, what Heather is talking about, what Brian's talking about is just everyone's just gut reaction to seeing a big crisis in the marriages. People really tend to push hard on it. They get desperate. They tend to make demands that things be better, or that people work on things, or that there's just a lot of demands or begging or pleading or just any amount of those sort of things. And it tends to, push the other partner away, as they feel like, okay, they feel like they have some legitimate concerns, and if you just push them to just push past that, it really invalidates things. They don't feel heard, they don't feel safe. And sometimes just taking a bit of a step back, working on yourself, and being a very safe, inviting sort of person, even if you're not actively pushing towards the especially not pushing towards the relationship, can help someone feel a lot more calm and allow them the choice to step back into the relationship.
Exactly. So he's definitely mastering that. I mean, that list of wins is just, I mean, that's what we always want, right? But they're going to work on the marriage. They're putting their wedding ring back on. They're back in the same bed. And then I love you, right? Everyone that is in our audience craves those kind of wins. And I just think it's really crucial what he said about the moral of the story is just trust the process. I was just talking to another client of ours, Thomas, and we're going to share his story next week with you all. And he had to make that same kind of shift. And he realized that even on the outside, it seemed like he was doing all the right things. It wasn't until he kind of let it go that then he was in the right state to be safe. And when you feel safe to your spouse, then they naturally want to be with you. And that's exactly what our method is designed to do. All right, so now let's go deeper into part 2 here of what to do after an affair and how to kind of heal and rebuild, after going through something like that. So, Mark, what are maybe some of the common mistakes that we see people make so that we can be aware not to make those ourselves?
Yeah, I think a really common, and I have to clarify this because it might sound odd right at first, a really common one is really dwelling a lot on a lot of the pain or the betrayal itself, the affair itself. And I say I have to clarify that because absolutely there is really a need to process what happened, to get information, figure out what went wrong. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But what I tend to see is people saying, I'm hurt, and my spouse needs to understand really clearly how much they've hurt me, and they need, either they need to pay or they need to, it's almost like this, you've hurt me, now you need to feel some of that hurt back. Now, like I said, it sounds odd because there is certainly a need, as I said, for there to be some understanding, for there to be some acknowledgement of how much you've been hurt, the person who's been betrayed. But if you are, as the person who's been betrayed, are sitting a lot on that pain or wanting your partner to feel that pain too, or wanting to get back at them, or really just pushing on this because you're acting from that place of pain a lot, it tends to shut everything down. It tends to push the betraying partner further away, and it just ends up in a situation where neither one is feeling very safe. I want to say even further, I hear comments when I talk about affairs. I hear people, even when I ran the workshop the other week, I had people say, well, shouldn't they be the one that fixes this? Shouldn't they be the one that is concerned about making it safe for me? Why do I have to do that? Why do I have to be the one that's so concerned about making things safe? That's what I'm talking about, is that sentiment that, okay, it's not my job to do this and I'm hurting so much, they need to be the one to make me feel safe. And it's just coming at it from that angle. While it makes sense, I understand why everyone would react that way. It's not the ideal situation. And ideally, you would collaborate, work on it together to make both of you feel much more secure in the relationship.
That is so true. And often, with many people, this may be your experience as well. If you're listening to this, your spouse isn't willing to work on it with you. They're in love with someone else, or they just want out of the marriage. They're checked out. And so the idea that they need to be the one to fix it all, right, is very unlikely to happen at this point. And so it's taking control of what you can control and letting go of the rest. And I think that, last time, in the last podcast at the end, our marriage mythbuster was once a cheater, always a cheater. And we talked about the studies that showed that those who had been unfaithful were 3 times more likely to be unfaithful again. But the interesting correlation was that those that had been cheated on were also like twice as likely to be cheated on again. And so that made us think, like, well, why is that? Well, I think it has a lot to do with what this point is right here, that people get stuck so much in pain and they get in a cycle of hurt and hurt. Like, you hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you. And the gaps only widen and there's never any reconciliation. I remember last week, 2 weeks ago, the last podcast, you were saying that, they don't address those root issues. And even people sometimes that can recover from an affair, they still don't talk about what actually happened. And when you don't really resolve those issues, then they're more likely to come back up, right? It's like if the roots in my garden are rotten, it's going to continue to produce rotten fruit until I finally heal what's really going on underneath the surface.
We're actually going to talk about a case study towards the end of the podcast that kind of illustrates this very well, but we'll get to that. Anyway.
Awesome. So let's talk about, okay, so that's, a lot of people get stuck in the pain and they stay stuck there. And then, let's just play out a scenario. Say that there is an affair and I'm really, really hurt. I mean, that would obviously, it's a lot of pain to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And then the marriage ends and I just carry that with me. And I try to think that time's going to heal it, or I'm somehow going to be able to move on, but I never really resolve it. I never really figure out why it happened. Then that's going to be with me. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, so many people do that. They kind of sweep it under the rug and they say, well, okay, we won't deal with it. We're just going to move on. And then it festers. There's all I was adding to that conversation.
Right. And so we want to make sure that we feel our emotions, because I believe every emotion does come to serve us and it is important. And like Mark said, it even needs to be acknowledged on both sides. There's a place and a time for that, but we don't want to stay stuck there, because when we stay stuck there, all we get is more of the same thing. One of my favorite mentors, one of their sayings is, are you focusing on the objective or are you focusing on the obstacles? Which really comes back to the law of focus. What are you choosing to focus on? And if your heart and your energy and your mind, your emotional state is in so much pain and anger and fear and frustration that you never move on from that, unfortunately, the only thing you can get more of is that, until you learn how to heal and release that. So, Mark, for someone that's wanting to recover from this pain of the affair, what needs to happen? What are some of the things that need to happen to prevent further problems from happening?
Yeah, well, so just in general, and I went over this actually in our workshop last week. There's different, and I'll say phases, though there's some jumping back and forth between these phases. So it's not necessarily that they're sequential, but there's a tone, attune, attach, I think is the three things that are needed. So in terms of just preventing further problems, I think this is a lot in that atone phase. And this isn't an exhaustive list. This is just, some of the things that need to happen. And for the sake of time, we're going to just hit on a few of these. But a few of these things are, you actually have to take some time to properly end the affair in the right way. Some big mistakes that happen with this, I will see people who just are like, well, okay, I'm gonna tell the betraying spouse might say, I'm gonna tell you that the affair is over, and you just have to trust me, and then that's it. And it doesn't really provide any safety or stability with the relationship. There's certain steps that you need to go through to really make sure that both partners are absolutely clear that the affair is over. And it usually means that the betrayed spouse is working with the betraying spouse in close tandem. I see other mistakes like wanting to remain friends, which that's just dumb. It doesn't work like that. But if you can go through the steps of properly ending the affair, it can make it clear to the affair partner that things are over, so that it's less likely that they're going to reach out to the betraying spouse. And also, if you do it properly, it can make it easier for the betrayed spouse to feel a lot more safe and secure, so they're not always questioning whether it's really over. Beyond that, I think there does need to be a lot of transparency and just verification of the truth. So yes, I know there's a really strong pull from the betraying spouse wanting to feel a lot of trust. At the same time, trust is so needed, and in order to build that up, there needs to be a lot of transparency. But honestly, the marriage and trust is a bit broken at this stage, and so there needs to be lots of extra steps taken to verify the truth. You know, sometimes I refer to things like this as crutches. You know, just like in real life crutches, you need them for a time to help heal, but eventually, you know, crutches provide a lot more structure beyond what you might be able to do for yourself, just like something like this. And eventually you don't need it quite as much to move forward. And this is absolutely one of those cases where you need a crutch. I do think, now this might sound odd considering how much we talk about understanding, making things safe, but I am pulling this from some respected experts. This piece of advice is actually coming from Dr. John Gottman, who, you know, I think his work is really great. But establishing high costs of future betrayal. Now, when I say this, I give it some caveats or just clarification, because you can certainly go down that road and make things feel a lot less certain. Like if you're going at it with a lot of anger and saying, you know, this is, you know, if you do this again, there's no way I'm taking you back, and you better not do it, or else, which is one way of doing it. Other ways, you know, a much more healthy version of that is like, I really need this. I really need you to understand just how serious this is for me, because I want to make sure that I have a lot of respect for myself. And I would absolutely love to work with you and to have you help me to find that respect for myself and for each other. You know, going down more that route, like where you're explaining it from a positive perspective and what you're needing and wanting, and then collaborating with your spouse, works so much better than simply this is the boundary, you better not cross it or else we're through. And then, you know, one last thing that I think is really needed during this atone phase is simply forgiveness, finding some acceptance for what's going on. And this is not just a simple, okay, once and done. You yourself, if you are the betrayed spouse, you may need to do a lot of work coming to the point where you feel healthy about what happened. If you find that you're really holding on to a lot of resentment or pain, it's very likely because you haven't gone through a lot of these other steps, or your spouse may be, you know, like may not be quite as transparent, or maybe your spouse hasn't gone through and processed everything that happened with you. It's usually a symptom, and when I hear this, it's a symptom of not feeling heard, not feeling like you have enough information about what happened, not having a good sense of control over the whole situation. I always tell people, you know, if there's a hard time forgiving, it's because you're still holding on to this idea that you're likely to be betrayed again. Anyways, that would be just that one block, just simply preventing further problems. I think all those are needed, and just to get past a lot of the pain and all the yucky stuff. But once you get past that, I mean, there's lots more to work on. Heather, but I mean, do you understand, like here, you get it, that something big happened and there is a lot that you need to walk through in order for things to feel healthy, for things to feel stable again. You know what I mean, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I've had the privilege of watching you, Mark, work with our clients through this exact process. Mm-hmm. You know, their fear about it happening again. Do I check his phone? Do I follow up on her Facebook account? Like, what's the right way to handle this? They say that the affair is over. And I know that we're going to talk about one of our clients, Leah. And I remember you talking with her about, you know, the crutches, not a crutch isn't a bad thing, but actually isn't a tool that we need to use right now to heal, because this has been damaged. And now you both want to work on it. We've helped you get to that point, and that's awesome. But there's some healing, some therapy, if you will, like we go to physical therapy, right? And we're going to need to use this tool to allow this part of the relationship to heal. And then I remember, you know, she was talking about, you know, that needed to be a healthy boundary. You kind of alluded to some healthy boundaries, which if you haven't watched that podcast or listened to it, go back and definitely dig into that, because healthy boundaries are really crucial to heal and repair that trust when done in the right way. So yeah, and seeing how she got to the point where she didn't need to use it anymore. She got to the point where I don't need to check his phone anymore. I don't need to follow up on this. I don't need to make these calls. And they have really, truly healed from that. So these are all very fundamental things. They're hard to implement, right? And if you've gone through this, there's a lot of confusion about maybe how should I do this? When is it appropriate? When is it not? How do I have this tricky conversation with my husband or my wife about this? How do I let them know that I'm still hurting? Those kind of things. And so that's why we do the work that we do, to help guide you. And Mark shows you exactly how to go through each of those situations and how to apply this kind of atoning process.
So after that, and I say after, like I said before, it's not necessarily sequential, and you may need to jump between phases back and forth a little bit, depending on what's going on. But generally, next comes that attune phase. And this, honestly, I think applies to just about any relationship in crisis, in that the attune phase is really about figuring out how to solve problems together without it feeling overwhelming. And this is at the heart of any relationship that is in crisis. This issue of some sort of problem, just solving problems together without it becoming overwhelming. Almost all the, like Heather, you see this a lot with our clients, that almost every single one of them, part of the reason why they're there is because they don't have an effective way to solve problems with their spouse. And this is absolutely what happens with affairs, especially, is communication breaks down. They're not able to solve these problems. They get frustrated, and another option comes along where, hey, here's someone who actually will listen to me, who will talk about my problems, and it's an acceptable thing, instead of facing a lot of that rejection. And it's absolutely a process that needs to be worked on with any couple that has experienced affair, bar none. Every single one needs to go through this.
So you mentioned the workshop. So Mark and I, we just did a workshop, the End Affair workshop, with a select amount of clients. What did they experience kind of as you were going through this? What were some of their questions or their resistance, and how did you kind of help them get through that? Because I can see that, this is a big deal, how to solve problems together without it being overwhelming. It's so easy for the overwhelm to take over, right?
Yes. What I intended to see is, with a lot of the people in the workshop, they were asking questions more on how to get to this phase, rather than, dealing with the phase in itself. I think that's a big challenge, is actually getting your spouse to sit down with you, getting them to the point where they feel safe enough to talk with you that they could actually talk about some of the process of solving problems together. Even with the betraying partner, the one who was unfaithful, the big reason why they went somewhere else is because they were, like I said, they're simply frustrated that they were not unable to talk about things, that they were unable to solve problems within the relationship. And so they're in a bit more of this guarded, protective mode themselves, even though, yes, logically they should be the ones that are trying to solve this. They themselves are maybe not as much as the betrayed partner, but in different ways they are also feeling unsafe and uncertain and unsteady, and need to help everything. They need some help calming everything down in order to come to this sort of attune phase. And I'm not seeing names, all I'm seeing is Facebook users along the side. And yeah, someone says something that, they need and they feel guilty. That's a good point, and you should say, well, they should feel guilty and all this, but what I'm saying here is some of these feelings, like that guilt or that overwhelm, prevents them from approaching the relationship in a healthy manner, such that they won't be able to attune very well. They won't be able to solve the problems without it feeling overwhelming. All right, that's Crystal. Thanks, Crystal. And so, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of your comments, and you're spot on. Like, they think that they need someone better, because they say, well, if I was with someone better, then maybe I'd be able to solve this better. Maybe I'd be able to listen to this better. And that's just it's not the case. Everyone is just, sometimes I just want to shake people a little bit and say, no, you just need to look at this just a little bit differently, and you could probably solve this very easily within your relationship.
Mark, that's hilarious. Okay. So let's talk about what it really feels like when you can attune. Mark, I'm sure this is something, in fact, I know it's something that you and Jennifer do all the time.
Oh, yeah. We honestly, Heather, just, and I always check with Jen. My wife Jen is always fine with me sharing stuff about our relationship. We actually just had a big fight last night. It wasn't even really like a big fight, but like there was a lot of tension here. It was over something small. And frankly, it's because, you know, we're having to deal with some extra stress with some problems with our kids. And but the great thing was, you know, it probably took us about an hour or so to get through this, and we even went through even this sort of process unconsciously, where we were like coming together and we say, you know what, this is probably what's going on. We were going through that atone phase. You know, I'm sorry for how I acted. And we came together, we said, okay, how do we actually talk about these feelings together? How do we actually resolve this? How do we come together and be able to share this openly without it feeling so overwhelming and stressful? And then afterward, we snuggled up and we watched a cheesy, you know, romantic sort of show together, and you know, we were happy by the end of the evening. But yeah, what was your question? Again, Heather.
What it feels like to have this attunement in your relationship, and instead of holding on to pain. I used to just kind of be one that would kind of keep things in, try not to, you know, make a big deal about it, because if I did, it would probably make it worse, until the point where I couldn't handle it anymore, and then it would be a huge explosion. But then there wasn't like the reconciliation and the healing and fully forgiving and releasing the pain. And now learning how to do that, where we can hurt each other, and we have, but we can heal and we can forgive and release that pain so that it's not continuing with us. It's like it's not in me. Like, I don't know if you can relate to this anyway.
Yeah, I do. So how it feels to me, it feels incredibly comforting and safe and stable, which is good in a long-term relationship, because I know that Jen and I, if we do have any problems, I know that we're going to work through it, and I know that we're going to be good. And usually it's a very short period where we are actually upset with each other. We usually get over it very quick, and it's just very comforting to know that you know, Jen and I are going to work through these things, and that she's going to be there for me no matter what.
And this is essential to having a better than ever marriage, because it's not about having a perfect marriage. It's not about that challenges won't come and that there will never be stress. There'll never be any hurt or pain ever. That's not what it's about. But it's about continually coming together and going through this kind of a tuning process. That's how we have a better than ever marriage. And when you learn those skills that you didn't have before, maybe you didn't have them before the affair happened, your marriage truly can become better now, because now you have the skills to be able to do that and to heal quickly and work together as a team to solve your problems. So let's talk about the last piece of this. After we've kind of atoned and we've attuned, let's go to attachment. What does that look like?
If a relationship has been hurt, then there's going to be at least some period where you aren't really getting a lot of those positive pieces from the relationship. And especially with something big like an affair and a lot of trust has been broken, you may need to go through a period where you are working on reintroducing a lot of those good parts of the relationship again, the intimacy and the dates and the fun. And the mistake that I see here is that couples, they come together and say, see, I don't feel good right now. I don't feel like I have that spark right now. I don't feel like I have that romance right now. It must be because we just are not meant to be, and we're just incompatible. And the truth is, if you've gone through some hurt, it's not really, it doesn't make sense for you to feel like that in that moment. And you need to go through and rebuild that again. Not that it's going to take quite as long as, say, rebuilding it from scratch, but you do need to go through a process where you're saying, you know what we need to actually work on feeling good together. We need to work on making sex feel close and intimate and good between each other. And you know what? It's okay if it's just mediocre right now, because we're actually working on this feeling better. How can we make it work better? And that's, I think, the big hallmark of this attach phase is the desire to make it better while being okay with it not being spectacular in the moment. And it's that kind of duality that really makes it easy to make progress in that phase.
That is fascinating to me, because it's kind of like letting go of the expectation, like taking the pressure off while still holding the vision of what you want.
Yeah, that's isn't that like a huge principle when, trying to develop a positive mindset, is that right there?
That's exactly it. And so when you're talking about making things feel good again, what does that look like as far as, intimacy, communication, fun, anything like that? Yeah,
so when I am taking anyone through like this attach phase, if it's really damaged and you really need help, once again, I like to introduce those crutches. In this case, you may need to schedule out having sex. You may need to really schedule out and say, we are going to have dates once every other week, or however often it may be. Or we are going to say, Tuesday nights after the kids go to bed, that is our time where we are going to have fun and we are going to be together and we're going to do something relaxing. But if you can actually commit to that, and it tends to naturally feel better over time. There are some cases, there maybe even many cases, where some of those feelings don't come back naturally or right away, and there's maybe some fine-tuning that needs to go on. Maybe there is some dysfunctional beliefs that are getting in the way, or some misinterpretations of each other's motives or actions that really aren't really serving you well. But there's plenty of exercises that can be done to really focus in more on those positive moments and to recognize some of the positive intentions from your partner that make it a lot easier.
So I kind of see the attuning phase before we go to attachment. It's kind of like a clearing phase. Like we're kind of clearing the slate, both in the relationship and in ourselves. And from a mindset perspective, there would be a lot of, like you said, maybe dysfunctional beliefs. We call them, limiting beliefs that would come up. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I can't trust people. Once they cheat on me, they're always going to cheat on me. People I love always hurt me. And you can hold on to some of those things. So what we always make sure happens is that you clear those out so that you truly have a clean slate and you adopt the empowering beliefs that you really want. And you work on those. Like Mark said, there's exercises to do that. And there's also exercises that when you are, having that attachment and you're working on that attachment, you're recognizing the good. And you're celebrating the good and even amplifying the good. Because when you focus on that, you're going to start to get more of that in the relationship. It just puts you into the right kind of energy to receive more and more of that.
This is what I really like about studying human behavior like this, because I find, I was using the term dysfunctional beliefs, and then you brought in the term limiting beliefs. What's interesting is I was actually coming from a different background than you were with those two terms. I was thinking, okay, here's the psychology background term, and then you're talking about more from like the personal development background terms. But what's interesting is finding so many of the same ideas and a lot of different theories. I'm sure, if we dug, we could probably find similar thoughts or ideas with this sort of thing, even within many religions or other philosophies. And this just tends to confirm to me that, hey, there's some principles here that really make sense. We should probably listen to them. If lots of really smart people who've developed these hugely popular philosophies are all thinking very similar things. Anyway.
Agreed. And so if you're, bringing it back to the people, like to you listening to this, if you're feeling like I felt before in my life, like, how do I forgive? How do I let this go? I'm so full of pain and bitterness. There's so much fear. I don't feel good enough about myself. I'm always thinking I need to measure up in some way. Then that's where you really need to do some work on that internal level so that you can have the ability to then have true attachment, which is kind of this last piece that we're putting together here. And you can feel good enough, worthy, deserving, and let go of any of the fear or the resistance to it so that you can truly experience it in a beautiful and joyful and freeing, secure way that's genuine. It's not a facade, right? But it's a true experience that you can have in your relationship. And so Mark and I, we've been able to see many clients go through this journey and go from a state of heartbroken, betrayed trust, affairs, infidelity, dishonesty, insecurity, and go through what we said with kind of our end affair process here of how to open up communication. I saw some comments here that, I can't even talk to my husband. I can't even get him to open up about the affair. And so how do we do that? So that's definitely the first milestone, is that we have to open up that communication and increase understanding. We went into that more in depth in the last podcast. And then where do you put those healthy boundaries in so that you can feel safe, so that you can have the opportunity to restore the marriage and not push your stuff further away, but actually draw them to you. And then here, going into atoning, attuning, and attachment. So Mark, can you share with us maybe an example of one of these clients that we've been able to help with this journey? Because I think it's really important that we learn from other people and see what's actually possible for us.
So I remember, and I changed his name, whenever we don't get express permission, we always change the names. So I remember Sarah and her husband who was having an emotional affair with another woman. And Sarah would come to me frequently, and she would express all this frustration because her husband really was downplaying the seriousness of the affair and saying, she's just nagging, and she's too critical of him, and that's why he wants to talk to this other woman and spend time with her. So that was when Sarah first started working with us. And a lot of the blame for what was going on was shifted back onto Sarah from her husband. So what I started doing with Sarah, I started working with her on how to handle that blame and criticism, and how to set some boundaries with her husband to let her husband know how she's feeling without him feeling attacked as well. Because that was, when I started looking at it, that was what the really big problem was, is every time that Sarah went to her husband, he was feeling attacked, and he would shut down or get angry and really lash out. But when we were able to help Sarah approach it a little bit better, with a lot more calm and understanding, then her husband actually started opening up quite a bit with her. And from there, we were able to communicate with him just why this was important and how serious it was to Sarah. Now, in that case, I think what ended up happening is more information came out, and such that I think it did go further than an emotional affair. But in the end, things were safe for Sarah to talk to her husband, and he was able to share that information willingly with her. At that point, there was further struggles because the husband didn't want to end it properly. He didn't want Sarah involved in the process, and so the affair started to linger quite a bit more because it wasn't being ended properly. He wasn't wanting to work with Sarah on that. Frankly, it's because he was very likely ashamed. He didn't want to involve Sarah in that process, and felt a lot of guilt over what had happened, is what it came to be. But we helped, once again, set some boundaries and help improve that communication so that they could finally end it. They were able to then get better communication going, so that the husband actually was taking time to talk with Sarah and understand how this affected her. And then he started working with us so that we could talk with them and figure out how to actually together communicate better and do that a bit more of that attune. And then I think I lost track of them as they were starting to reintroduce a lot more dates and spending quality time together and all of that stuff. So it ended up, at least from where I saw it, like it was going in a good direction. So, I mean, I think that was a case book or a textbook, this is the word I was using, textbook example of exactly what we were looking, or what we were talking about just now, is went through all those steps very clearly with a spouse, I might add, that wasn't wanting to work on the marriage at first. So it does happen.
That is awesome. So yeah, and then we've had many other clients like Sarah, and the name changed here, and also Leah, who has shared her story here in the Thriving Marriage group on our YouTube channel. If you haven't seen that, I really encourage you to check it out. They had been married several years, and they were expecting their first child when she found out that he was having an affair. And he said, I'm in love with this other woman, and I want a divorce, and I'm done. And that's when she started working with us. And she went through this process as well of learning how to help him open up communication and showing him that it was safe to talk with her about it and that she just wanted to understand him. And as she did that more and more, got into that teeter-totter stage. And this is a really challenging stage where they kind of go back and forth and they're not quite sure. They see the appeal of being with you again, but then they're also kind of pulled in the other direction. Mm-hmm. And so it's really crucial that we have healthy boundaries and that we reconnect in the right way, which is exactly what she did, to the point where he then left the affair partner and committed fully to working on the marriage with her. And now they have another child, and they check in with us all the time on how fabulous they're doing. And like Leah says, their marriage truly is better than ever before. Why would she say that? Well, in her words, roughly paraphrasing, but she said that, before we just didn't, we didn't see the problems for what they were. We didn't have these skills. And now that we do, we're able to solve these problems, and we're able to understand each other and connect with each other better and deeper. I
think really traumatic events like this are really good motivation for people to want to do better and to grow. I actually, I can look back to some really trying times in my life, and I think what I actually want, what I have wanted now, now that I'm in the future, what I've wanted to not go through that, and I said no. I think it's really good oftentimes to have to go through really trying times so that we can grow, become a better person, or in the case sometimes of affairs, become even happier now that we've learned better tools and we've learned to trust each other a bit more. Right. I remember one of our clients, Ian, say that he was grateful that the affair happened, even though it was the worst thing that ever happened. He said it was one of the best things that ever happened because it finally showed him what was the wake-up call he said he needed. Mm-hmm. So that's true. We wouldn't ever want to go through it again, probably, but we're always grateful that it happened. But not everyone chooses that. And that's why it comes to our marriage mythbuster here, that if my spouse has an affair, a lot of people will say, if they cheat on me, I'm done. And I can respect that. And everyone has their choices. But the idea that there's nothing I can do, that's what we wanted to touch on. So if my spouse has an affair, I'm done, and there's nothing I can do to fix it. Hopefully by now, after 2 full podcasts on this one issue, you can see that that is not true, right? There are so many things that you can do to save the marriage. And above all, choose to learn from these challenges rather than run from them, or rather than stay stuck in pain, stay stuck in, I'm going to say it, victimhood of feeling like this just happened to me, instead of, wow, this actually happened for me. There's things that I can learn and grow, and I can actually become better. So we don't miss those opportunities that life gives us to grow and learn and become better. So we can look back and say, wow, I'm actually grateful that this really hard thing happened. It was like the worst thing ever, but it was also the best thing ever because I chose to learn and grow from it. Anything you want to add to that, Mark? Yeah, I think the myth there, like this idea that there's nothing you can do. It's a hard line, and you just need to end the marriage after that. I think comes from the idea that it's more like the idea that I can't handle that kind of pain, and I wouldn't be able to deal with the pain from here. And the thing is, I think a lot of people can surprise themselves with just how much they can endure. Not to say that that's the ideal, but especially when you have built up a lot of commitment, and you've had a lot of time with your spouse. I think most people come to the conclusion that when push comes to shove, they would much rather face that challenge rather than just simply give up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this podcast yourself if you're experiencing inferiority and you thought there's absolutely nothing I can do and I just need to let it go. That's why you're here, right?
That is true. So thank you, Mark. Thank you for sharing this. And this is the high level overview. We went through a lot really fast, but this is an intense process. It's an intense problem. That's why we say we're the ICU for marriage, is that we handle these intense kind of problems and can guide you through it so that you don't have to wonder, what can I do? Or I need a miracle, or I just need them to change. But you know exactly what you can do and how to navigate through all the challenges that trip most couples up. And like Mark said, so that you can take this opportunity to become better, to really learn and to grow from it, and take that opportunity. And that's why you're here. So if we can help you in any way, we encourage you to go over to highthrivecoaching.com and check out. We are not doing a boot camp now. It is closed as of the recording of this. However, we do still have our one-on-one coaching program, group coaching, and we do have online marriage resources that can help you no matter what stage you're in, so that we can help as many people as possible. That is our mission, and that is the movement that we are striving to make here in this world, so that we can ease the pain, free ourselves from the pain, and truly thrive. Not just survive, but thrive. That's our little tagline. So next week, we're going to share with you signs that their story is changing and that they'll soon come back. This one came right from our group. You guys asked for it, and we're really excited to share it with you. As you know, the story is the reasons why they're leaving. And so here we're going to share with you some of the signs that their story is actually changing and that they will soon come back to you. So thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you guys next time.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.